It's a wonderful morning at NTV. My name is Priscilla Regina Naloga. 14 minutes past 8 a.m. We continue on with the morning's affairs, and of course we are sure that we have, just increased your heartbeat a little bit. But we need to calm it down and look at the realities that we are grappling with as a country as we set into the year 2023. Now, last year's PLE results are set to be released today, and as per information from authorities, and this is according to the head of UNEB, DanOdongo, 832,839 pupils sat for their primary leaving examinations last year. Now, this comes at the cusp of resuming the academic year 2023 and amidst a multitude of developments in the education sector, both positive and, trust me, there's also the negative side of this. I am joined by pundits that are going to be helping us break down what the education picture looks like before COVID-19, what COVID-19 unearthed, both positive and negative, and where do we get to move on from what we have presently in the education sector. Now, I'm going to start with my immediate left. I am joined by Mr. Christopher Kiwanuka Kaweesa, and he's an educationist. Good morning to you, Mr. Kaweesa.
Good morning, Regina.
Yes, please.
I'm happy to be here this morning, and a very good morning to the NTV viewers.
And your opening remarks on the conversation ahead of us?
I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate all those learners who have been able to sit their PLE and pass. I think that's a very good thing. In Uganda's education policy, PLE is really the foundation of somebody being called educated in this country. Otherwise, before that, you are not. So we say you get PLE, so you advance to other stages of education. And I think we need to look at that as a very important stage in our education policy. Now, I want to tell them, these boys and girls that are coming to senior one, they are not joining senior one of the old curriculum.
Hey,
no.
Yes, they're joining the new curriculum.
Yeah, exactly. And because of that, I want to begin by saying that the old curriculum is winding up with the senior 4 of this year. And I want to caution those children, those students in senior 4 this year, that you will not have an opportunity to repeat because your curriculum is gone. So you better put in double effort to see that you pass to the next stage. And for those of you who are coming in the new curriculum, also you should know that you are coming with a different strategy. You are combining both vocational and the formal academics right from senior 1. And for those who are going to senior 3 this year, you are also going to sit your first vocational exam under DIT. Much as they say it may not be compulsory for everybody, it is important that everybody takes it, because it tests your skill and you have a certificate of competence at the end of senior 3 as you aim higher to senior 4 for the traditional UNEB exams. Okay.
All right, let us also get to look at the lady next to your left. She is called Safinah Nakulima. She is a lawyer and an advocate for education. She works with ISER. Good morning to you, and you're most welcome.
Good morning, Priscilla, and thank you for having me on the program.
Okay, and your opening remarks to the subject matter?
Yeah, so as we look towards the release of PLE today, I would like to also add my voice on what Christopher has just said, to congratulate those who sat for the examinations last year. But I think for me what is important is for us to look at how many Ugandan children sat for PLE last year. Because time and again, when UNEB releases results, their figures, their percentages of children who did not make it to P7. So we need to keep interrogating why they don't make it to that level that Christopher has said is very, very important. We know from the different reports from the Ministry of Education and other entities that many of these kids drop out of school because of school fees. among other factors. But tuition and non-tuition fees that is being charged in many of these schools make many of these children not make it to primary 7. And this is regardless of whether they are in public schools or government schools or even private schools. We see many of them being left behind. We see many of them falling within the cracks. You talked about the things that happened during COVID. There were many girls who got pregnant. Some of them were not allowed in school. Some schools allowed them to sit for their examination. So there are many factors. And as we look towards Agenda 2030, where we don't have to leave anyone behind, we have to interrogate such issues such that the number of children who sit for their PLE increases as we go forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. And then next to her, we are joined by Deogracious Musimenta. He's also an educational researcher on the technical level. He's traversed the country to analyze and assess the educational government programs, and he's in the right position to give us government's perspective on the subject matter this morning. Good morning to you, and you're most welcome.
Yeah, good morning, Regina. I'm happy to be hosted again on NTV. Of course, I join my colleague to congratulate actually those who start PLE, and let's wait for the results. But at the end of the day, the journey of success has started with our children. Once again, I'm Musimenta Deogracious. I concentrate my in research. But as you said, I've traveled the whole country, most districts of the country. But I can assure you, education is one of the key pillars in any country or in any economy or designed for economic development. So if you sit down and let education just be taken for granted, I can assure you all other sectors will grapple, won't succeed. So the issue is now on quality and access. To me, I always say when I travel in different areas of the country, there are people who always have this talk, and my colleagues laugh. There is balanced diet of food. People eat kachumbari, eat matoke, cassava, but also there is balanced diet of poverty, you know. So at social, mental, even in finances, people are really in vicious cycles of poverty. And I can assure you, poverty is affecting all sectors, whether you're young, whether you're old. And this is to remind our policymakers and even those in government and even those not supporting government. The reality is the country is characterized by 80% of young population, and of which this growing population is huge. So it means when we are designing policies, programs for the country to thrive, I can assure you we have to design a very holistic programs that brings every child, whether urban or rural, on board for better country. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Musimenta. Now, we are also joined by the Private Teachers Association representation in Nasana. Stephen Mbide is on ground to first give us the realities of the ground before we get into the deep of this matter. Good morning to you, Stephen Mbide.
Thank you so much. Good morning to you indeed. This is Nancy, and I'm coming to you from Morning Star Education Services, one of the schools that are also waiting for the release of the 2022 primary living examinations. The results that are going to be announced today by the UNEB officials and also the Education Minister, that is Janet Museveni. But we know that will be happening around 10 or 11 this morning. Let me speak to one of the directors of private schools, that is proprietors of private education institutions in Uganda, Maria Gertrude Sebufu, and she's also the director here at Morning Star Education Services. Because her being a leader, but also as an educationist, you must be, of course, also waiting for the release of these examinations, because I know you also have candidates. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Morning at NTV.
Good morning, NTV. Good morning, Ugandans.
And first of all, the results are going to be released today. What's the anticipation from you, from your side, first of all?
Excitement, mixed feelings, anticipation. We are here to see what comes out of it, but we believe for the best, because we have been waiting for this long enough. Yes.
You know, there is tension amongst the parents, the teachers, the pupils who sat for these examinations. You know, it was a tough time. I spoke to them during the examinations because we were coming from a tough year that was after COVID. Yes. And many of them are maybe thinking, like, how will our pupils perform? How will our children perform? what kind of assurance were you in touch with examiners, first of all? Understand the feeling from the pupils.
Now, we must appreciate that these learners had education gaps based on COVID, and they had to skip a few classes. So there were gaps. We did our part, and the children did their part. We really hope that the examiners understood the challenges that we had, and we hope that the marking was fair, considering the fact that these kids had academic gaps from the years that they were home from COVID. So we hope for the best. Yes.
And you know, this also comes at a time when parents are also preparing to get the pupils back to school. And also those who are not in P7, but also those who are in other classes, they're looking forward for the beginning of term. That is just in 1 week from now. And many are saying that now the economic situation is still tough. As you look for the results, but also the schools are about to open. How is this also going to play into you, the appropriators? Because there is also planned school fees policy.
The school fee policy is there, and we can't deny it, but we think that the policymakers must understand a few things before the policy is passed. First, we as PL appreciate that the president was very visionary to open up the the UPE and USE for education policies, and the education system is very free. Yes, so we would advise parents as PL to find a school that fits within your economic being, because there are schools that charge 3 million shillings. There are schools that charge 700,000. There are schools that charge 200,000. And there are those that are free UPE. You just buy porridge. Yes? I'm not even sure if they buy uniforms or porridge anymore. So we suggest that a parent should go to where they fit. Don't feel coerced to go to a school you cannot afford, because things are different. And the policy should be implemented after government has worked on the things that cause school fees to hiken. There are several factors that bring up this. The cost of food. We've had children in holidays at home, and we know the cost of food. Parents know this, but you're sending all of them to us. They must feed well. Parents of Kampala even say they shouldn't eat posho. Yes? And we know the cost of rice, right? They want to eat beef. So the factors that hiken the school fees are there. And we would actually say that government should help us to fix the cost of living. Fuel is high, food is high, the bins are high.
What should it do exactly? Because now that I know they are also in a budgeting period, what should they do about that?
I think we need to look
at, for you who are in private schools.
I think we need to look at the cost of fuel and the cost of food. And then also the taxes that we are asked to pay. They should look at the taxation in private schools before they control the school fees. We are not against it, but let them first look at where the problem comes in from. We hiken because of the demands around the school. The feeding of the children for 3.5 months. Yes, the paying of salaries. Yes, the taxes that we must pay. I think it is important that they pay attention to that before the policy is implemented.
Okay, let me take you back to PLE. You know, during the time when the pupils were going to see the examinations, it was still a tough time. And some of you, the private proprietors, allowed these people to see the examinations. But now UNEB is saying those who did not clear the fees are not supposed to receive the results. Okay, they will hold them until you give them the notice that yes, they've cleared, so that they release the examinations. Is this fair enough? Because you also want to know how your child or your pupil performed, but also as a parent and a child is anticipating, waiting for these results. Is this fair enough?
Maybe not fair, maybe fair, because I want you to understand the side of the proprietor. I taught the child. I allowed them to sit for examination. And I want to assume that in this period of the holiday, the parent was working hard to find this money to pay before the examinations come out. Because if I release them, where will I ever find them again? I think it is also a mandate of the parent to make sure they fulfill their responsibility. And that takes me back to where I started. Go where you can afford. Don't go to a school where you cannot even pay 50% of the tuition they're asking you to pay. find a school you can afford, such that you don't go through all of this, because the school has a working budget that must be paid up by school fees that you get from the parents. We don't have external finance from anywhere else, so we depend on the school fees. So if I allowed your child to sit for the examinations, then it is your mandate to make sure that you fulfill and pay. I think there needs to be a mutual understanding between the parent and the school, but also to make sure that the school does not end up in losses, because we will fail to run the schools. Yes.
All right, finally from you, Maria Sebofo, now what's your final word to the parents, the pupils and teachers, everyone who is concerned about our education system in Uganda, the better of it?
I think the parents need to look at what they intend for their children to achieve. Look at the school and look at the facilities that they offer. Understand that this is what I want for my child. And if you can afford it, pay for it. But if you can't, find a place that you can afford, because the economic situation is not good. But then you don't also have to stretch yourself beyond your limit. So understand where you can afford and find the facilities that you can afford. If you love them, then you're going to stretch and pay for them. If you don't like them, or if you can't afford them, then you ought to find a place that you can afford.
Thank you so much, Maria Gertrude Sebo, for the Director, Morning Star Education Services. I know you're waiting for these examinations. They're here in Nansana, but I know they also, some of them are waiting for these results from the Ndeje campus, that is in Namasuba. Stephen Imbido, Professor Chibuga, now handing you back to studio. We shall be keeping it here, and of course, just wait for these results relayed live as they are being released here on NTV. Any time from now, we shall be giving you all the updates. Back to you in the studios.
You've actually opened up a kind of worms for me here in studio. With my guests, we've been talking and debating about affordability that has been shared by that specialist in education in Nansana, and she was simply saying children and parents should go to schools in the year 2023 that they can afford, not because of status, not because of pressure, and so on. So let me turn to my points this morning and ask, why are schools increasing fees at such a time as this, in the coming first term of the academic year 2023, when we saw it happening in the last term 2022 and the second term of 2022? Wasn't that enough increase? Let me start with you, Mr. Kaweesa.
Thank you, Regina. I want to say that I'm not an advocate for increasing school fees all the time. Personally, I happen to be in the private sector of the education industry and a proprietor. And I will tell you, it takes a lot of time for me to say that I'm going to increase school fees. In my own opinion, I feel that if the parents have agreed with the school on the school fees right from senior one, this structure should remain reasonably stable for the whole of that lower secondary. Perhaps it may change as somebody advances to higher levels of senior 4, where you bring in a lot of work, you are preparing for exams. For the private schools, even UNEB is putting on you larger costs, the direct and the indirect costs. They say each child is going to pay 200,000 for UNEB, senior 4. At the same time, the major costs of administering the exam remain with the school, with the center. That's what actually brings some bit of change around that. However, I don't dispute the fact that actually some schools were increasing. But when I cited the trend last year, I found that this became more of a characteristic of the first world schools, both in government and private.
For a moment that you're going to say world war, I said
no. first world schools in Uganda. Okay. You know them. Those ones where even when they increase the school fees, the parents still line up to get the positions in those schools for their own reasons. Okay? So we have a few in the private sector, but there are also a few in the government sector. Now, I want to tell you something very unique about private schools. We don't have PTAs. The parents negotiate with the administration directly.
PTAs. In the school where you're a proprietor,
yes,
did you increase school fees for this coming academic year?
No.
Why?
Because I know that the kind of parents I'm dealing with will not afford. Much as the prices have gone high, I also see that the parents' level of income has come down. Therefore, we must strike a balance. I may think of increasing school fees only on new admissions, but not on continuing students. And that has been the policy that I have adopted always.
Okay, all right. Let me go to your neighbor there, Ms. Safinah. In regards to school fees increment, why this seems to become a trend, especially, and I would have said private school, but now it's across all education, both public education and private education. Where you see it as an advocate, why do you think we are seeing this as a trend than a solution?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, it is a trend because I think the most important thing is that the government has failed to take charge of education. You know, in years back, government opened up education to many players. And when you open up a sector like education, you need to stay in control. You need to set standards. And regulation of fees is one of those standards that the government ought to have, you know, been at the top of it. So you find that right now everyone does what they want. You'll find, for example, Christopher has been talking about high-end schools. You'll find high-end schools, one charging maybe 1 million, another one 2 millions, another one 2.5, but when you look at them, they are within the same level. So one of the things that has happened to the sector is that government needs to regulate the issue of fees like it's done in other countries.
We seem to be seeing government doing that. We seem to have seen the minister coming out and making a statement in regards to that. Most recently, we also saw the Speaker of Parliament making a statement in that regard and saying that anyone who is actually found defying that order is going to face the wrath of the law.
Yes, Priscilla, government, we are very cognizant of the fact that now government is taking steps to make sure that fees are being regulated, but like you've seen in the public eye, you've seen the debates that have been going on. Many people are resisting the issue of regulation of fees, and this ranges from, you know, private providers, people that are manning or are in charge of government-aided schools for their reasons. For example, in the last 2 weeks, we've seen a number of people saying, you know, you think education is a right. For me, it's a business and livelihood. So this brings in the issue of, I'm looking at the return of investment. So their investment or what they put in is what drives them to increase fees because they think they have to get what they put in this kind of business. So that is one of the other factors that has led to increase in fees. But like I said initially, the issue is for government to set standards, to set caps, to say these kind of schools, primary schools, they are supposed to charge this kind of money. Secondary schools, they are supposed to charge this kind of money, such that we have all children on board. Many children now are out of schools. We had some research in Buyikwe. Buyikwe is not far away from Kampala. And we found kids who dropped out of school even before COVID. And we were asking them, how much were you paying in the schools where you were? And they were saying 50,000, but their parents could not afford it. But these were government schools where you think that government is already injecting in money in terms of payment for salary of teachers, subsidizing them in so many ways. But they were charging money that made many children not stay in schools.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Musimenta, this then causes a lot of havoc and mayhem in regards to access to education.
Yes.
Because if I as a parent can no longer afford to take my child to this school, then I'm going to have to take them to another school. God forbid that other school has also had an increment in the next term. The trend is going to continue. At some point, we have done stories here on NTV of children who have had to take their own lives because their parents have told them they can no longer go to school. You have traversed the country.
Yes.
Talk to us about access to education and how we're doing as a country.
Okay, thank you, Regina, and once again, our good viewers who are watching NTV in Uganda. The whole issue to me is access, as we echoed it, but I can assure you the problems are cross-cutting. You can say they are increasing school fees, maybe in these first world schools. The Mike Riga has been highlighting them, but those in Buyikwe, Kabong, let's go to Ntoroko, Neremisengo, Kabale Butanda, Raka Ikachera, Liantonde Kashagama. I can assure you it's not an issue of school fees because the challenges are different. Me, I'm a UPE product. So the challenges we used to face, and even they are up now, they are still there, is the rural child, the distance, access to reading materials, the malnutrition component, the short-term hunger. They are hungry, they don't have food. So whether you increase the fees or whether you don't increase, they will just drop out even at P5, get married. The violence, gender-based violence, the child violence. You're getting the point. So to me, the concentration is now on nutrition, because nutrition, access, and also poverty. People in rural communities in Uganda are poor. 23% people are still struggling with vicious cycles of poverty. So whether you increase 1 million to 2 million, to me, it's just a story with these urban schools. But when you go to Katatenga, those peri-urban areas, even Buyikwe, go to Obonji, Moyo, where I have to first cross River Nile, Kabale, Butandaleke, where they have to first use a canoe to access a school. You don't talk about school fees. You don't talk about whether you increase or not. So the whole issue is the government to design a holistic and equitable programming that can lead you to access, to equity, let everybody access, whether urban or poor, whether urban or rural, or whether rich or poor. Okay. So a scenario, I did some research with World Bank and also Dr. Ampe from School of Food Science. UNHCR was a partner, Ministry of Education, OPM and Agriculture. It was multi-sector food security assessment in schools. So when I was in Ikamuli, children have different scenarios. The hunger is a cross-cutting issue. They are stunted. They don't eat well. They just go to school to just say, I'm going to school. Then at lunch time, they don't have food, lunch. So to me, I see challenges are different. So when you're designing a program, and I'm happy that I'm here to say these things, the whole issue is now government to wake up. Okay. If you say, that's why I appreciate Honorable Tayewa, the Deputy Speaker of Parliament of Uganda. He's saying, if you say those students of Utanda, Rukunjiri, Kanungu, you have to say when you're designing a program or a policy, for example, those accessing education at senior 4, senior 6 to university, let's put a tie and say those who are from rural communities, rural districts, the poor families, the poor districts, all those who are accessing government scholarships should be allocated to those districts. Okay. These of Wudon, Amiriango.
We're going to be coming back to that because I know that in one way or another it ties into the new curriculum from the ministry. Now coming back to you, Mr. Kaweesa, you talked about the PTA. While I was in school, PTA was a strong arm of the government, of the school that I was in. Nothing was passed in decision that did not include the voice of PTA. For those of you that don't know PTA, PTA is Parent Teacher Association. And it has come to light to me that of debt, especially in the private sector, there's no longer PTA's recognition and adoption in the system, administration system. More so, I've come to get information that some proprietors are even using it as an element to milk money when you're having a school fees breakdown, PTA 400,000 shillings. And this is something you have seen and experienced yourself. Talk to us about the initial intent of PTA and how it's very paramount in the current discussion.
When we look at the Parents Teachers Association as an organ within the schools, it operates much more, it operates better in a school that is operating under government interventions. Because it is supposed to come in and stand in to regulate a number of things, especially funding aspects within the schools. But I will tell you, it is the PTA that has been making decisions. We want to buy a bus. We want to build this kind of building. We want to do this kind of thing.
Become part of the business.
But it is not likely to be in the pure private schools setting. Because pure private school settings, they discuss school fees directly with the parents. It's not going through any organ. There are two organs in a school. In the case of primary, there is a school management committee, which is a lawful, legal, which is supposed to oversee the policy element. And then the PTA to deal with the understanding of the charges, which things should be paid by a parent and which shouldn't. And at secondary level, then we have the board of governors, which is similar to the school management committee. Okay? But in private schools, you will not find PTA. One of the reasons that, as members have said, a good number of investors in the private schools are looking at it as business.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's why you come up with very critical competition. Critical competition so that they can hold onto the ground and be able to attract good payers into their schools. Now, when we go to what he has said, first of all, you talked about the 400. I have seen a fees structure of one of the schools, the big schools, and government-aided school. And they said the school fees is 2.2 million, but how is it broken down?
In the structure breakdown.
350,000 uniform. 150,000 admission for new students. 400,000 PTA. 600,000 board of governors.
No.
And then you look at the tuition. And you look at the tuition. And they say tuition 100,000.
Eh?
Yes. You want me to give you these things, I can bring them to you in confidence. Yes. But what does this mean? That's where the government should come in. And I think they were trying to attempt to say requirements should be not more than this, and these are the only ones that are allowable. And I remember when we were meeting the Minister of Education recently, some people argued and said, how can you say that transport is not an allowable requirement in a school, when even at one point in time, before the NRM government, the governments then were providing transport to schools. They were giving them lorries, they were giving them things of that nature.
Safinah, in this regard, where do we come in, and where can government come in? How can we aid private sector in curbing this vice? Because clearly, it's no longer about direct education to the child, but facilities and enhancements that make the environment comfortable for the child to get the education that has remained the same.
First and foremost, we have to get some things right. One, when government is making its interventions, it relies on its data. So when you look at the Ugandan National Household Survey, the most recent household survey, it says that around 61.7% of boys and 62.1% of girls drop out because of the high cost of education. This is not the first time that this particular report talks about dropouts based on the high cost of education. Secondly, like I mentioned, the government is already on track to come up with a statutory instrument or regulation to make sure that schools in particular categories, both primary and secondary, charge particular fees that are capped. And this is done in other countries like Rwanda, like Namibia. There is some sort of regulation for both government and private schools. So, thirdly, the government should not so much listen to the voices out there, but move forward on the issue of regulation of fees, because every term in the past years, the Ministry of Education would issue circulars. No school should increase fees before coming to the permanent secretary. And schools would go ahead to increase fees. So there was, like, the circulars were not punitive enough. And many of these providers, even parents don't know that they are supposed even to walk to the permanent secretary to say this particular school has increased fees and so on and so forth. So it was not punitive enough, but we think that now with the process that is leading us into having a regulation of fees, we'll have particular schools capped. How much fees are they supposed to charge? So you ask what the government should be doing is to move on with that, to ensure that education is affordable. This business of people coming to say, if you can't pay, don't come, oh, this is my business. I know people are saying it's a right, but for me it's business. That cannot happen in a sector like education. There has to be standards that people are supposed to follow. Those who can't follow.
From your submission, it also sounds like perhaps in this day and era, there's ignorance to the parent. Let's not leave the parent out of this subject because they're, community to this subject. Perhaps there's ignorance to the parent, not knowing their rights as a parent who is giving an education to their child. You have talked about they have the right to walk to the ministry, permanent secretary, and inform the school of their actions, especially as far as funding is concerned. And the PTAs, their ignorance of that being one of their rights, that they should be having access to whatever administrative calls there are to the schools. Don't you think this too is actually aiding or enabling the environment?
You're right.
And how can we resolve that?
Of course, there is need for the public to know that, one, education is a public good. And once, for example, ministry comes up to say, the Ministry of Education comes up to say that schools are not supposed to increase fees unless they've done ABCD, it's in our right as parents to know the channels. So the ministry should also discuss the channels. Once this happens, for example, they could have a toll-free line. They could say, this is the way you're supposed to come to the ministry to say this has happened, and so on and so forth. But there's supposed to be a pathway where parents know that we can come in confidence and say, my kid goes to school X, this school increased fees without having a parents' meeting, and they did not also adhere to what government has put up in terms of regulating or capping fees for the different schools.
Right.
That is also a critical factor.
Mr. Musimenta, you talked about the rural and how the problems there are different.
Yes.
Let's talk about the new curriculum. It cuts across. And so I trust that if it's causing a lot of changes, what are the challenges that are being faced by the rural education actors in implementing the new curriculum? Because it comes with its own expenses and changes.
Yes, true. Yes, true. Thank you so much again, Regina. To me, when we talk about the rural Uganda setting, of course, the challenges are different, as we've been saying. But also, I want to say something small. Uganda is an open economy, a liberalized economy. So you're free to start your own school and charge. To me, the concentration shouldn't be like, yes, the government has to regulate, but also there is a point of, like, there's this point. If government has a public school, have you designed your programs very well? Okay, so that at the end of the day, the UPE, those who are poor, they have some good things to, they have good performance, food. So now the rural Uganda, whereby they don't know about fees, is the garden model up programming. Is there a garden model set in UPE schools, secondary schools? Are children able to eat lunch, breakfast through the garden system? Because I see Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Education, Minister of Health, and even Office of Prime Minister, which is an oversight leader in this, and even other actors, UNICEF, they started a school model, and I was part of the research team and even the planning team. So in Kamuli, they have some schools. In Isinjiro, they are there. Even in Imbarara and in Tungamo, you get it, whereby UNICEF, they support with the milk, breakfast, lunch. So, and they are performing well. So it means whether you start your school in Intungamo, which charges 3 million, most of parents will take their children maybe to these public schools. But there is also that kind of quality education.
Okay.
So to me, the new curriculum now, teachers, they face challenges.
All right.
Technology.
Yes.
So we want to appreciate the government program, for example, strengthening education systems in learning, which is the Ministry of Education, and also management for results.
Let me take conclusive remarks on this subject matter, because I know it's a continuous one, and we will have you back here to continue this conversation. But as of this morning, with the pressure that is in a few hours, what is your conclusion? Let me start with you, Mr. Kaweesa.
I want to say that actually the whole problem of the dilemma in Uganda's education sector is policy. Okay. One, when we talk about the research policy, let us regulate school fees, but basing on what?
All right.
Where is the data? That has the government given a good explanation as to why school fees are increasing.
All right.
That's one. Number two.
No, let me give let me give the lady an opportunity to also to give her closing remark.
Yes, so education is a public good, a common good at that, and government should not leave it to the market forces for people to determine what they are doing. They should take charge and ensure that in the process of offering this education, all children are covered. Okay. Not because they are poor or they are rich, but there has to be means of regulating to ensure that whether you're coming from a poor background or a rich background, you have access to quality education.
And the final closing remark?
Yeah, thank you so much. Me, what I can tell you, the whole issue is Parliament to review policies.
Okay.
Let them set policies and they say, those who are from rural communities,
okay,
the Butanda, Kanungu, Kavera Maido, Kweni, Obonji, we are going to allow all those senior 6 to go to university for free of charge. Okay. So those who are in the Midiango, Sijui, whether you increase to 4 million, we shall go back to Ntungam or Rakai or Liantonde. So at the end of the day, there's no need to say, don't increase to 3 million. Put a policy that will actually force them to a little bit reduce the school fees. Otherwise, the whole issue is we have to access education because it is education that brings quality development.
Education is a right, but of course it must be governed and controlled by the government, which all here agree that it comes down to policy for us to have equity in education, to have quality of education also, and also ensure that there's access across the bar, both in urban and the rural parts of this country. Because at the end of the day, education is fundamental, a pillar in the economic development of Uganda. That brings us to the end of this conversation. We do have some birthdays in the house. Allow me to share some birthdays. There's a happy birthday message here to darling Brenda, and you do have someone saying, "Guy, you look fine, and make sure that you are as fine as wine in your next year." And this is coming in from Betsy Sharon and your friends. So happy birthday to you, Brenda. And also Omurunji Musao Nasuna, thank you so much for coming through as my friend, and I wish you a happy birthday courtesy of Sharon and your friends. Well, that brings us to a break. We're going to be returning shortly.